Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me on this second virtual live tasting. I am Flavian, and I am your chief curator here at Spirits Network. I'm here to keep you entertained because, well, you're stuck at home. It doesn't mean that you have to stop being entertained, right? You need to keep on watching cool stuff. We're here to help. Today is quite special, and well, you already understand why. You see these Game of Thrones bottles here? Yep, that's what it is. That's what we're gonna be tasting. Now remember, social distancing still continues, okay? But you're stuck at home doesn't mean that you have to be dry. Now, as you could tell, most people have been, well, how should I put this? Purchasing a lot of their favorite tipples. And therefore, it's a lot of bottles at home. It's also many shows that you can watch. Well, here you go. What do you do at home? Of course, you work from home, okay? And there's that homeschooling. But there's something else. When it comes that time where you need to have a good libation, you need to sip on something fine, well, here we are. And those bottles have been in excess, being purchased almost like toilet paper, right? I mean, in my case, it's Danielle Steele's romance novels. But maybe that's just me. Well, maybe I shouldn't be sharing this with you. All I'm trying to say here is, you've got a lot of bottles at home, but you may have to choose depending on the mood you're in and all this, right? Okay, so what is better? To have your favorite bottles and to be watching shows, and in your glass you end up with both of them mixed together. Okay, you know what I want to talk about, and I've got to tell you, I have not watched any of those. I'm talking about the Game of Thrones shows, right? But it's not why you should be judging me, because I've tasted those whiskeys. And those whiskeys are really good, okay? So I need to understand the show and the connection with the malts. And in order to do so, I'd like you to meet the wonderful friend, Ewan Morgan. And Ewan is national educator and is here as an expert because he knows this stuff and he knows the show because he's watched it. He's here to help us understand why and how. Welcome, Ewan. Good to have you here.
Thank you very much, Flavian. Here I am in my whiskey cave in self-whiskey isolation, and I've even washed my hands for it.
That's very nice of you. We gotta play it safe. Thank you for this. First in the lineup is CARDHU, and I've got to say that CARDHU is, all right, you know, if you're watching every single one of those episodes, you'll be thinking, well, you know, Flavien keeps on saying that whichever bottle he's picking is a favorite. Okay, but yeah, because they are my favorites. Truly, they are my favorites. But there's something about CARDHU that helped me a lot. When I had to bring friends over to this category of single malt Scotch whiskey, I had to do so always thinking of making sure that they would enter this category of single malt Scotch whiskey with great pleasure, right? And CARDHU offers just this. It is so friendly that it's almost impossible to have a newbie say, oh, I don't like Scotch. You know, sometimes you've picked this almost odd, maybe too pungent, too rich single malt Scotch whiskey. It's your favorite and you absolutely want your best friend to have it. And he or she doesn't like it, and that's fine. You know, it's a very personal thing, right? So, look, CARDHU was always so friendly that you could not like it. Now, after quite a few years of not finding CARDHU on the US soil, it's been back already for a little time, right? And now it's back with this Game of Thrones edition. So, without further ado, and remember, since last week that I have connected to the Facebook, I can answer your questions. Ewan is here to answer your questions. So after each of those, we'll be answering a few of your questions, all right? Now, this CARDHU, Game of Thrones Gold Reserve. Let's see, Ewan, how is that relevant to the Game of Thrones?
So with all the houses, we paired them out quite meticulously. We spent a long time making sure that there was a real cohesive link between the distilleries and the story. And some people got very heated about it, but CARDHU, I think, is a very, very strong connection. So, fueled by the same fiery spirit, that the fierce female leadership of Daenerys Targaryen, who I'm sure you don't know, but you will know because you're going to go and watch the show after this. Flavian,
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
There you go. So this single malt celebrates legendary women. So if you look at CARDHU's history all the way through the 1800s, from like 1811, where we still saw the first purchase of the farm at CARDHU, through to 1816, when her husband, Mrs. Cummings' husband, was arrested 5 times for making illicit whiskey. She was really the backbone and the strength behind that family. She was there to protect him. She was also there to make sure that he didn't get caught again, by making sure he got a license to distill. So, during the 1800s, whiskey was typically a very male-dominated industry. It's not like that today, as we all know. But back then, she was one of the very few who was working in that industry. So very, very strong women in a male-dominated world, almost very similar to the Daenerys character in Game of Thrones.
I see. All right. And I actually heard that she was the one with the idea to cover up the mashing and the fermenting and the distilling aromas with her home baking. And now I don't know if it's because of this, but it's pretty smart. And now I get caramel. I get really sweet and salted caramel. It's big on vanilla, but it's very friendly. I go back to this CARDHU being it's a no-brainer, right? It's a lot more intense than the regular CARDHU that we can find, right?
I would definitely agree with that. There's a lot more of that rich apple character. So CARDHU is typically quite a light, gentle space cider, but with this one, you're seeing like baked apple spiciness, like baked apple spices, cinnamon, and mace, nutmeg, things like that. And then that moves into clove, a little red apple. So we're moving more into that red apple arena, more fresh. And then it finishes for me, on the nose, certainly it finishes for me with a little nutty character that definitely, when you taste it on the palate, that nuttiness comes at the very back end of it. So you're very right. It's a big, robust.
That's dangerously creamy. Definitely has a lot richer character than the regular CARDHU, I want to say. Anything specific on the maturation that would explain this?
So we've got all American ex-bourbon in here. So we have some fresh bourbon casks, we have some refill bourbon casks in here. So we're going to see a lot of that vanilla character coming through from the bourbon, a lot of that fresh sweetness that's going to come through there, and then that's piggybacking on that wonderful distillery character. So we're going to see that big flavors, that lots of fruit, and then that nice sweet creamy vanilla.
All right, so let's take a couple of questions from our Facebook friends. Let's see. Well, I see quite a few of you. Obviously, you got your bottles. Because you're tasting along. I'm really happy to read this because, since last week's episode, as you know, home delivery sales of liquor is up. It's actually way up, okay? And there have been some delivery delays, maybe here and there, depending on the area you live in. So just make sure that for next week's episode, you order way ahead of time, okay? Now, all right, let's see. Charlie wants to know if I haven't seen any of the Game of Thrones episode. Well, yes, no, it's true. Genuinely, I have not. I feel terrible now because, especially since I love the whiskey so much. Okay, but I guarantee you, I will watch them. Okay, I love to get a certain type of whiskey based on the mood I'm in. So for me, it's this collaboration between HBO and those distilleries is really interesting because maybe there's a chance to further dive into the emotional connection, right? Let's see. Which expression of the Game of Thrones line is the most popular? Well, Ewan, it's a question for you.
So I will tell you that the one that's getting the most conversation at the moment from folks who I talk to is the Mortlach 15, which is the Raven edition, the One-Eyed Raven edition. Came out as the most recent release from the Game of Thrones line. And Mortlach fans are very obsessive. It's almost semi-cultish sometimes when people are talking about Mortlach in hushed tones. So people have been asking me a lot of questions about that and a lot of questions about Mortlach's very unique distillation process, a partial double, partial triple, partial quadruple distillation in one still house. Some people have a lot of trouble getting their heads around that. So I've been spending a good amount of time explaining that to folks. But prior to that, it was probably the Oban Night's Watch. People love the cool black bottle, the cool black tube. And so, yeah, that was probably the most sought after one that was from the line, the original line.
All right, I see. I mean, I've got to say the look, the design of these bottles is just amazing, truly. So, all right, well, maybe we take another question. Let's see. Frank wants you to describe the difference between the regular CARDHU and between the CARDHU 12-year-old that we know here and this particular CARDHU Gold Reserve.
That's a very good question, Frank. And the answer, aside from the extra years of maturation that we would see in the 12-year-old, is the 12-year-old is more of a gentle whiskey. It's more of a gentle beast. There's more older casks in there, so refill and rejuvenated casks that have been used before in whiskey. So when we first get bourbon casks from America, they'll be classified as first fill or fresh casks. And there's more percentage of those fresh casks in this particular bottle. So at a younger age, you will see more vibrancy, you'll see more of that, what we call grip in the whiskey industry. So we're seeing more of that big, huge, I keep saying the word robust, but big, robust flavors, that apple, that spiciness that's coming through. And then rejuvenated casks. Rejuvenated can be 2 or 3 life cycles in storing whiskey. We then take the whiskey out, remove the heads, which is the ends of the barrel, scrape out all of the char that's inside, and then re-char those so we get another life cycle out of it, so we don't have to cut down so many trees. But we also get to use that barrel again, and that will provide a spicy quality to it. So you're seeing A, fresh casks, and B, spiciness. So that's the big difference.
I see. One last question I just read is from Kyle, who would love to know where you can buy these bottles. Well, first of all, because of the delays, because of what's going on currently in the world, do it ahead of time. All right, that's number one. 2, all your fine liquor stores should have them. So what you just do is you go on spiritsnetwork.com. You remember that while you're watching, whether it's Spirits for Beginners or the Science Spirits or so many of the other shows, the Home Bar Hero show, for example, you can buy your bottles right there on Spirits Network, whether it's on your big screen, on your smart TV, or directly from the app of your phone, okay? And but Ewan, all of these are available in the US, correct?
They are indeed.
All right, so
they are indeed.
You can really just ask, send us an email, and we'll guide you through further your purchase experience. Okay. Now, let's jump into number 2, if you're okay. Dalwhinnie, another very special one. So Dalwhinnie is in a place that is recorded as being the coldest, on average, annual lowest temperature in Scotland. And if you think of Scotland, of course, first you have in mind the very hospitable people there. You have in mind those amazing landscapes, right? So much greenness. It's absolutely beautiful. Okay, but you're not exactly thinking of those super hot beaches like you'd be in the Caribbean or something. Okay, it can be cold, but it's really very, very cold. But Dalwhinnie happens to be where 6 degrees Celsius is the annual average. So it's a cold and remote place in Scotland. Hence, Dalwhinnie Winter's Frost, House Stark. Okay, Ewan, what about that one?
So you kind of summed up the setting the scene perfectly. It's very high, it's very cold, and in fact that in Scotland was recorded at Dalwhinnie Distillery of -6 Celsius, and that was over the course of 2 months. So it really is a very cold place. It's quite an isolated place, which makes it perfect for House Stark. That resiliency and strength that you would have to A, work there, and B, live there, thrive under the most intense situations. The winters there can be extremely harsh. So Winterfell, if you watch the TV show, when you're going to watch the TV show, you will see as frigid temperatures in there. Dalwhinnie is known for being the highest altitude working distillery in Scotland. It's very cold and, like we said, very remote, very much like the north where the House Stark resides. So it really does make the two a very kind of standard, iconic kind of pairing between that stark coldness, that barrenness, that altitude. And it's not the easiest place to work, it's not the easiest place to live, but they make phenomenal whiskey there.
Well, I've got to say, Dalwhinnie is one of my favorites for late fall. When I go to the cabin upstate, it's really remote, right? I mean, there's nowhere around. I'm surrounded by woods. For me, it's that malt that I'm going to have to myself. So Dalwhinnie means the meeting place. And to me, it's a little strange, actually. That's only my personal take on it, because when I'm up there, I really don't want to see anyone. Okay, but nonetheless, the whiskey works for me as long as I don't see anyone. But let's taste this, and we can talk about why the weather is important for the whiskey itself. Okay, remember, it's all very personal. I get venison jerky. And then those raisins. It's a chocolate bliss. This definitely calls for a chocolate pairing. Well, maybe I know where I'm gonna find myself for Easter. I got my chocolate and malt pairing. That's it. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about is the worm tubs, because we can geek out on the mashing and the fermentation and the distillation and the maturation and all this, but this industry has become quite modern, right? And there was an interesting move a few years ago when the owners of the distillery decided to be more efficient, when they decided to modernize the distillery and switch from the old-fashioned way of condensing the vapors at the end of the second distillation, right, on the spirit run. And they got rid of the worm tubs, wanted to install the shell and tube condensers, right? A lot more efficient. They realized that the character of the spirit was so different that they decided it was so much of a change that they should put the worm tubs back in, or should I say back out, because those worm tubs are actually on the outside of the distillery. And I mean, think about it. You've got this long copper coil that starts maybe at that much of a diameter, right? It's a huge copper coil that snakes through a cold water bath. Now it starts like this and it ends up maybe like that, right? So the vapors travel through this coil and, well, little by little they get condensed, okay? But if those worm tubs are outside, because of these elements, the cold or the less so cold, you know, say during late spring, right, will have an effect on the spirit itself. So already you've got a lot less copper contact versus shell and tube condensers, right? And now you've got seasonal changes of your spirit, the actual aromatic flavor profile of your spirit, because it's outside. But keep in mind, you don't have a Dalwhinnie fall, you don't have a Dalwhinnie winter, a spring, a summer release, right? Because in the end, most single malts will not be single barrels, right? So they take many single barrels and they put that together, and this ends up being in the bottle. So all of these seasonal changes are actually erased, so to speak, or think of it as many different characteristics, many flavor personalities that actually constitute the blend of this single malt, right? How does that make any sense with Game of Thrones here? Ewan?
Well, I will say this. I'm very impressed by your explanation there of worm tubs and shell and tube condensers. There's not too many people who fully understand why people have worm tubs, why people have shell and tube condensers, and there's only a handful of worm tubs in existence in Scotch whisky today. So they're very rare. And if you see one, and if you are going on a whiskey tour and you're going around it and you see them on the outside, they're large vats on the outside of the distillery, and you go around there and you talk to your tour guide, you can say, I see you have worm tubs there, you must be going for a heavier spirit style. And they will be extremely impressed by your geeky knowledge just at glancing at their distillery. So the rarity of those things kind of ties back to this storyline. You know, it's all about, you know, the rarity of the spirit in people, and extremely stressful and situations, unusual situations. So it's an unusual distillery. It's now an unusual way of producing whiskey, and Diageo have quite a few distilleries that still have those worm tubs. So Dalwhinnie being one, Talisker and Mortlake being a couple of the others.
Shall we take a couple of questions, Ewan?
Of course.
So, looking through our questions here, let's see. Age statement. Why isn't there an age statement on this Dalwhinnie? Nor was there any on the CARDHU, and yet Lagavulin, the one that we'll taste right after, is a 9-year-old. Can you touch on this?
I can, yeah. So age statements are hotly kind of within the world of whiskey, and they're called NAS or non-age statement. And some people are against them, other people love them, and I personally love them because when you think about the gamut of flavor from, you know, you have to be 3 years and 1 day to be called Scotch whisky. None of the whiskeys in here are 3 years old, by the way. So that is the legal starting point. So if you have a lot of flavor starting there all the way through to 40, 50 years plus, you're looking at, if you're a blender, you're looking at the different flavors that you're seeing at each point of the journey of maturation. And if you constrict yourself into a number, say for example, they pull a 7 or a 6-year-old cask out and they think that the flavor in it is exemplary, they want to use it because it's perfect for the blend. You wouldn't, if you were a painter, you wouldn't discount a color, for example, just because some people didn't think that color was, you know, fancy enough or anything like that, or had a very kind of austere name. So they want to do exactly the same thing. They want to use all of the palette of flavor in the same way that a painter would use all of the paints that were available to them. So it's really about creating a flavor journey rather than being constricted by an age statement.
I see.
Whereas on the other side, when we look at Lagavulin 9, it does have an age statement on there. And the reason why is because we released an 8-year-old for the anniversary of Lagavulin. So they wanted to have a 9 to follow on from it. And that's why it has an age statement.
Thank you, Ewan. A couple of other questions. Tony is asking if this Dalwhinnie would fare better with water. Again, it's very personal, but Ewan, you're the expert.
So that's a very subjective one, and you're absolutely right, Fleming. It's completely down to the person and their own palate. When I do tastings and I write my tasting notes, I will taste neat, and then I will take it down to 20% alcohol dilution, and then I will taste it diluted. And you will see different subtle nuances if you take down the dilution. Now, I'm not saying take it down to 20%, but it's adding a few drops of water to it. If you take your glass, tilt it to the side, add a little bit of water, you will see a physical reaction in there. It almost looks like oil. And that's a process, it's called viscimmetry. It's where ethanol hits water and you see the physical reaction happening. But what also is happening within the spirit is that you're opening up different flavor molecules. So some people call it cracking the spirit or releasing the serpent. It has various different names all over the world. But what is happening on a molecular level is different flavor compounds in there called congeners. Some are trapped within bonds called ethanol myceles bonds. This is kind of geeky. If you add water to it, take the dilution below 46 ABV, it blows apart those little bonds and releases more of those little pockets of flavor. So you will taste different things, you will smell different things, and also taking down the alcohol level will make it easier on your palate as well. It'll be easier to smell, it'll be easier to roll around on your palate. You won't get what we call alcohol bloom. So there's positives, there's pros and cons to everything, and it's all down to the personal. It's all down to you, really. If you prefer it diluted, do it. If you don't. If you just like drinking cast nuts responsibly.
Absolutely, go nuts responsibly. I like this one. Ewan, another question from Charlie is, and this is one I meant to ask you as well. We've got 8 different marks in this Game of Thrones series. Will there be another one soon? Because already the connoisseurs, the enthusiasts, are thrilled, but there are many other malts out there that maybe deserve a showing. So, will there be?
I cannot say anything other than the show has concluded, but who knows what's going to happen with that storyline, and that's all I can say.
All right, very good. Let's have this 9-year-old. And Lagavulin, well, this is the one that made smoky whiskey famous, I want to say, in modern times, right? Certainly
one of them.
We'll be tasting Lagavulin 16 next week, but this is the one I jumped to right away when I received those Game of Thrones malts, because it's a very favorite yet again, and I'm just in love with the regular Lagavulin 16. I was pretty nervous when, as you say, for the 200 years celebration, they released that 8-year-old. It ended up being amazing. Every year when the limited edition 12-year-old, it's a very different maturation profile there. It's always super good. So Lagavulin, it's hard to come up with a new mark. As much as you need to satisfy the malt enthusiasts out there, I guess if you're the owner of that malt, you've got to be very careful, because you'll be criticized if it's not perfect. And right off the bat, it's a very different Lagavulin. I still think it's amazing. The nose is amazing. It's a different sort of peat. I mean,
Yeah.
how can you explain this?
So, a lot of people get turned off by the prospect of a very smoky Islay whiskey, and lots of verbiage comes out like band-aid, barbecue, medicinal, tarry rope, big, weird and wonderful things like that. And some people are pushed away by that kind of medicinal quality. But whereas with Lagavulin, it's quite sweet. So as opposed to something very savory, big, smoky, and challenging, with Lagavulin, once you get past that initial smoke, which is quite gentle, in my opinion, you really reach this nice, gentle sweetness that really sets it apart from most of the other smoky whiskies that are out there. And I love smoky whiskies, don't get me wrong, but that's really, for me, they do a very long distillation, the longest in Scotland, 9 hours, and because you're getting a lot of purification from the copper, you end up with a very bright spirit, albeit a smoky one. So you end up with this, what I think is quite a gentle, complex, sweet smoke.
I mean, look, it is sweet and complex. Different peat from the regular Lagavulin, yeah. But, so you're saying those, just to go back to distillation, just to geek out for a second, you're saying that the very slow distillation at Lagavulin, I remember seeing those beautiful copper gleaming pear-shaped stills. I know they're filled not to the rim, because technically you can't really do this, but the charge is huge in the still itself.
Mm-hmm.
What does the slow distillation do? Because we touched up on this last week. Is it why I'm getting this oiliness and this sweetness? Because it's not, except for maybe the distiller's edition, that Pedro Jimenez, there's no sweetness coming from any sweet sherry on the maturation here. So do I relate the sweetness to what we're getting in the new make spirit from this distillation?
So you'll get sweetness from a couple of places. So you're absolutely right in the concentration that they're filling that spirit still up to, which is about 3/4 of the way up, which is very unusual. You're left with this headspace that's just concentrating flavor. And it's all in contact with copper, of course, the whole time, and copper works as a purifier. So you're intensifying flavor, but you're also removing a lot of sulfur quality from it. So they're, again, getting geeky, you have things in whiskey compounds called dimethyl disulfide, dimethyl trisulfide, and they're the ones that give that sulfury quality. And in small doses, that can be very nice. They use it in Dalwhinnie, they use it in Glenkinchie. But at Lagavulin, what they're wanting to do is have a very clean, oily, smoky, sweet liquid. So once it comes out of that still and then goes into bourbon casks, where you're going to get sweetness again. So you're ending up with this wonderful, pure, gentle spirit that then rests in these wonderful vanilla-laden, sweet American casks. That's really where you're seeing the distillery character coming from, with that Islay peat and that long distillation, and then resting in those wonderful bourbon casks.
Ewan, this House Lannister Lagavulin, what does it make? What does it mean to be a Lannister? And how can I relate to the malt?
So Lagavulin is one of the most legendary single malt brands. It's been crafted on Islay, on the North Atlantic coast for over 200 years, mirroring the meticulous calculation and tenacity that is employed by the Lannisters when you watch the show, of course, in their rise to conquer the Iron Throne. The single malt is a big, huge whiskey, but it's also a gentle whiskey, which kind of underlies the complexity of the characters that are within the show, and it recalls the Lannisters' riches and is best served neat, I personally think. But if you do want to add just a few drops of water to it, then please do, because the sweetness will amplify once you add a little bit of water to it. So with dilution, you will see a completely different animal. But for me, I drink my Lagavulin neat. That's the way I like it.
Same here. On the palate, it's slightly drying. I don't see this as any negative. On the contrary. But what would this be calling for a pairing? Is it blue cheese? Is it barbecue? What do you know works best here?
Well, when you have, if you think about this in the same context as prize fighters going up against each other, one of my friends uses this analogy. It's like you wouldn't put a welterweight up against a heavyweight, and the same goes with pairing. This is a heavyweight whiskey, albeit with a nice sweetness to it. Big flavors in here. Blue cheese is perfect. Any smoked meats, anchovies on toast, gorgonzola, things like that. So those big flavors that aren't going to get engulfed by the spirit. So you want to be able to taste everything. There should be a unison to everything in life, and having those different flavors in there that kind of work and marry together perfectly is really what you're looking for. So big flavors.
And on this topic of big flavors, clearly Frank is with us because he's suggesting Roquefort. And Roquefort, is that French cheese, the blue cheese that's really
Perfect.
pungent. Absolutely, I'm with you. Let's have a Lagavulin and blue cheese pairing session. We could have all the Lagavulin marks in the range, of course, including this, and all of those blue cheeses, from the Stilton to the Roquefort and others. Kyle,
Frank knows where it's
yeah,
at.
clearly, and Kyle has a spicy sopressata suggestions, which now that he says that, I guess could work for me too. Think about it. Yeah, Kyle, I think you're onto something here. Well, look, those whiskeys are very different. Okay, there's definitely an occasion and a time, probably a mood for each of those. From House Targaryen CARDHU Gold Reserve to Lagavulin House Lannister 9-year-old and Dalwhinnie Winter's Frost House Stark, I think there's definitely that one whiskey that will make you happy right now. Well, and this concludes our second virtual live tasting. It's been thoroughly enjoyable, at least on my end. I hope you were able to sip along. If not, remember to start your purchasing right now because it can take some time. Remember that the team at Spirits Network is here to help you, so feel free to send us an email, curationteam@spiritsnetwork.com, and clearly use the code WWVIP for your year of free Explorer membership. We're here to help. As always, drink responsibly, drink better, not more. Stay safe, and remember that being stuck at home doesn't mean anything else than being safe at home. Cheers. Thank you, and thanks a lot, Ewan. Ewan, you're the best. Slanjva.
Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Slanjva.
Cheers, guys. Until next week, Talisker Storm, Lagavulin 16, and that's the lag thereof, the Singleton of Glendullan, 18-year-old. I'll find you back here on Wednesday, 6 p.m. Whiskey Wednesday. It's live. Slanjva. Thanks again, Ewan.